Okay, this is from the Joint House Inquiry into the attacks of September 11, 2001. Dianne Feinstein, a panelist, is interviewing the Deputy Secretary of State Richard Armitage and the Deputy Defense Secretary Paul Wolfowitz.
Senator Feinstein.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, welcome and thank you. What has come through to me so far is that although George Tenet declared war, either no one heard that declaration or not many people heeded it. And although the intelligence community warned that Al-Qaeda sought to attack the United States and was capable of inflicting mass casualties, really insufficient attention was devoted to the risk of an attack at home. Gaps in intelligence coverage were not filled. Defending the homeland should have been the #1 priority, but instead, attention really was focused on attacks overseas, and no real effort was made to harden the homeland to reduce the chances of attack.
You can actually blame the CIA for this one. It was the head of the Yemen, Al-Qaeda Yemen hub, Michelle Ann Casey, who worked at Alex Station, the Bin Laden issue station, where she told FBI agent liaison officer Mark Rossini from the New York Counterterrorism Unit that the information that is procured by the Counterterrorism Center at the CIA can't be shared with the FBI because they believe an attack was happening in Southeast Asia. The reason why they believed this was because there was a high-level Al-Qaeda meeting in Malaysia in January of 2000. Yet, during that meeting, it is alleged that there was going to be attacks on American targets in America and in Yemen.
Did the intelligence community, and I recognize that there's a shift of administrations, and I recognize the time it takes to get up and running, and I'm not intending to ask these questions purporting any blame whatsoever, but did the intelligence community clearly warn you that Al-Qaeda was capable of and sought to carry out a mass casualty attack on the United States?
Senator, thank you.
Love and sought purporting any blame whatsoever, but did the intelligence community clearly warn you that Al-Qaeda was capable of and sought to carry out a mass casualty attack on
multiple times? And again, I sound like a broken record. In 1995 with the Bajinka plot, in 1998 with the East Africa embassy bombings in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, the 2000 Millennium Plot, where the intelligence community, FBI, interviewed one of the people arrested, Ahmed Rassam, who was coming in from Canada, British Columbia, into the United States, and he was caught with a car packed with explosives on a ferry. And they interviewed him, and he gave them a short synopsis about the plan and what training camps were teaching, and the guerrilla tactics they were using, including making bombs and the compensation of hijacking airliners. That information was used in the August 6th presidential daily brief in 2001. So yes, Ms. Feinstein, the intelligence community knew about this. Did they relay that to the State Department? Well, here they are. What's their answer?
in the United States.
Senator, thank you. I recall being told by the intelligence community about the efforts of Al-Qaeda to develop chemical, bio, and radiological weapons. I do not recall, and I'm sure I didn't get any information that said they had this capability, they were intent on developing. I remember that.
Yeah, they were intent on developing, and they did try, but they never got their hands on, say, sarin gas or anthrax. What does Paul Wolfowitz have to say? Here's a real criminal.
Mr. Wolfowitz, you want to respond?
I don't recall any warning of the possibility of mass casualty attack using civilian airliners.
I have to laugh here. Amazing. So you're telling me, Mr. Wolfowitz, with straight face, that the intelligence, especially from the FBI, regarding the Bajinka plot, the interrogation of Abdul Hakim Murad from Malaysian authorities, Philippine authorities, and the FBI interviewed him too, as well as Ramzi Youssef. Those Bajinka dossiers are on my blog. They never told the State Department this? I think you're lying there, Mr. Wolfowitz.
Or any information that would have led us to contemplate the possibility of our shooting down a civilian airliner. I do recall a lot of information.
Is that the reason why the Pentagon was training for this, by the way, in the year 2000? For hijacked airliners? I think it was in, I forgot the month, October of 2000, where they were outlining a plan of hijacked airliners crashing into the Pentagon months before the September 11th attacks. I think it was about 8 or 9 months. Interesting. It seems that the intelligence apparatus knew about Al-Qaeda wanting to hijack planes and crash them into targets. And it's not new information.
Suggesting the danger of mass casualty attack from chemical, biological, nuclear weapons. And we undertook I disagree with the statement that nothing was done to protect the homeland. We put a major focus on what needed to be done to deal with particularly those kinds of mass casualty contingencies. We included a number of measures in our O2 budget proposal. And as I said earlier, when we did the quadrennial defense review, some considerable time before September 11th, we identified Homeland Defense as the #1 priority for the Defense Department for our transformation efforts.
Thank
you. You had enough money. In 2000, the Pentagon annual budget was $392 billion. Not million, billion. If you can't intercept hijacked airliners, you don't have a defense. And it's not like we didn't have the capabilities to intercept these jets. Now, yes, nobody could imagine multiple hijackings, but guess what? The intelligence apparatus knew about this. Were the FAA caught off guard? Because they weren't warned by the intelligence apparatus, although they claimed, the CIA does claim, Cofer Black of the counterterrorism unit claimed that they gave information to the FAA and shared with it about the want for terrorists to hijack planes.
you. And that's certainly correct. Since you've mentioned Iraq, and you mentioned it in your written statement as well, what do you see as the connection between Al-Qaeda and Iraq? And have you received any information which is specific enough to let you be convinced that there was a meeting between Mohammed and Iraqi intelligence in Prague or anywhere else?
Senator, this gets into a lot of classified areas, which I believe Director Tennant.
Okay, let me help you here, because I know you're not going to tell Dianne Feinstein. That information, this alleged information that Mohammed went to Prague, that never happened. That actually came from Israeli intelligence, which was fraudulent. This meeting never happened. However, it was important because what happened? Well, the United States captured Sheikh Ibn al-Libi, a Jordanian operative, and they tortured the living hell out of him. And as they were torturing him, he gave them exactly what they wanted to hear, that Al-Qaeda had met with Iraqi officials about obtaining chemical, biological weapons. That information was used in Secretary of State's Colin Powell's presentation at the United Nations Security Council, which led to the infamous him holding the anthrax vial. Afterwards, officials went back to al-Libi and said, why did you lie to us about al-Qaeda and Iraqi officials? And he told them, I told them whatever they wanted to hear so they'd stop torturing me. It was al-Libi's confession and the CIA's implication that Atta had met with Iraqi officials in Prague, the Israeli intelligence that said that al-Qaeda officials, al-Qaeda members, had met with Iraqi officials. These were all lies. And we went to war on this, and 1 million people, over 1 million people died in Iraq because of it. So people like Paul Wolfowitz, Richard Armitage, Dick Cheney, George Bush, they should be tried in international criminal court. But guess what? The United States, along with Israel, North Korea, and Iraq, just to name, I think there's 11 countries in the world that are not part of the International Criminal Court. Why? Because if they were, they'd be tried at The Hague.
I'm not asking you for the information, just what you...
Well, I'm sorry, one can't get into it without getting into the information. One of the things that we've said earlier is these are not issues where there is categorical, this is the case or that is the case. Almost everything we know or everything we think didn't happen has some uncertainty attached to it. But the point I was trying to make, the point Secretary of Defense is trying to make, is about more than just one country. It's about the fact that there are people out there, a number of them, with horrible capabilities and with hostile intentions. And if we insist on waiting until we have the kind of precise intelligence that allows us to say there is an imminent threat, we will wait too long. In fact, when one thinks about September 11th and the kinds of actions that might or might not have been taken in a war against al-Qaeda, it's worth remembering that the September 11th plot was clearly put into motion as early as the beginning of the year 2000, that the entire group of hijackers was in this country by the spring of last year, and that if we had succeeded in closing one door to them, they might very well have examined others. We know that Mohammed Atta, for example, was investigating the possibility of crop dusters, presumably to distribute biological weapons. So we can't defeat terrorism by defense, by closing every door we can find. We're only going to defeat terrorism when we put these organizations out of business.
Which you definitely could have, but instead you funded them. In 1979, we armed the foreign Arabs that were coming in from around the world and basically gave them Stinger missiles and rifles and guerrilla training from British MI6, the CIA, the Pakistan ISI, which was the major conduit for this, Israeli Mossad, training camps in Afghanistan. Now, there was only one Arab training camp in the beginning. That was the al-Masada camp. That's where al-Qaeda came from. And that was built by bin Laden because Afghans didn't like training with Arabs. And so after the war, bin Laden was actually exiled from Saudi Arabia. He went to the Sudan, and the members of the al-Masada training camp went with them, along with the Egyptians. And that's when the Egyptians like Ayman al-Zawahiri, Sayyid Imam al-Sharif, Dr. Fadl, Abu Hafs al-Masri, who later on became Mohammed Atef, the military commander, Abu Ubaidah al-Banshari, the original military commander. These are all hardline guerrilla operatives, people who actually are more violent than bin Laden's ragtag Arab bunch, which weren't even accepted within the Afghan community because the only good thing Arabs did for the war was die. They weren't very good fighters, except for guerrilla tactics and bomb making, which later, under the Egyptian influence, they became excellent in creating bombs. Nevertheless, this information was passed on to the intelligence communities in the United States and shared with national security briefs, national security councils headed by Richard Clarke. And you definitely, Paul Wolfowitz and Richard Armitage, would have been in the know regarding what al-Qaeda's capabilities were. But you, as a neocon, and a harsh one at that, an ardent neocon, you basically lied about Iraq's involvement with the September 11th attacks. If you were honest, which you're not, we would have went to war with Saudi Arabia at the very least, because they're the ones where most of the muscle hijackers came from, and the funding came from Al-Qaeda operatives, which were Saudis, like Mustafa al-Hasnawi, Abdulaziz Ali, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who has connections to Saudi Arabia, even though he's a Qatari, a Baluchi. But, you know, we went to war with Iraq, and then we went to war with Libya and Syria. Why? Because Saudi Arabia and Israel were the major influences of those conflicts, as well as the neocons and those of the left who allied with AIPAC in the Gulf lobby, because they're major donors in terms of foreign policy. And I didn't even mention the neocon bunch called the Vulcans, which you're a part of, Paul Wolfowitz, like Douglas Feith, Richard Pearl, Dick Cheney, Condoleezza Rice, God, say David Wurmser, Bill Kristol, who authored the Project for New American Century. These people should be in jail or hung for the crimes that they committed.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Senator Cox.
Yeah, that's enough, right? Because Feinstein basically is like, I'm not going to get a straight answer out of this guy. And basically, people from the State Department that testified at the 9/11 Commission, they were few and far between, like Paul Wolfowitz, Richard Armitage, Condoleezza Rice, and Colin Powell. Well, I wanted to hear from Dick Cheney and George Bush, but they didn't want to testify under oath in front of a commission and have it transcribed, because Bush and Cheney actually did that behind closed doors in front of the commission where no one took notes and it wasn't dictated. I wonder why. Was it because that they basically knew a little more of what they alluded to much later, or basically what they said was in the interests of their foreign partners, namely Saudi Arabia and Israel and Pakistan? But we can only speculate.